Wonderful. And I'll give the floor to Katie.
Thanks, Conte. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, whether your year is 2017, 2025, or 2975, or another one that I haven't heard of. But we've been enjoying many different celebrations of the new year over the last few weeks and hoping that you've all had some time to rest, relax, and enjoy life with friends and family over the last few weeks or month. We have a big year ahead of us. We wanted to start this call with just hello again, maybe a few reminders why we play whack-a-mole with AI note takers, for example, as we're letting everybody into these calls. But we have a substantive discussion as always because we need to hit the ground running this year, this replenishment year. And we wanted to talk a bit more about debt to health and what that tool is within the Global Fund and kind of what it is more generally in terms of, how it's approached in the field. And we have a few colleagues who are joining us who have some experience in different ways with both the Global Fund example as well as more generally, and then lots of opportunity for discussion. So that's sort of the agenda for today. We're just going to do a quick review, give you a little bit of an overview of our work over the next year. But first, most importantly, I think it's important that we all just take a moment, take stock of where we are. Conte believes that all of these cats are insane, or having bad days. Personally, this morning I feel a little bit like number six, but would love to hear from colleagues. Um, would love to hear from colleagues. Oh, a strong number seven from Conte. Fair enough. I think we should be scared, worried, and concerned for colleagues who might be a number nine. Six feels completely acceptable for Claudio, who's told us that it's 5 o'clock in the morning where he is today, and yet joining us. So as we start this new year, we're going to just give you a quick overview of some of the work that we're doing. But again, around these calls, we're really excited that, for now, for this year, we have the ability to offer translation, simultaneous translation during these calls to our Francophone colleagues. So we hope that you'll spread the word with us. And also, if you are Francophone and have been used to speaking in English on these calls, please can be welcome to speak French during these calls if you're asked to prepare or intervene or you're asking questions. That's why we have it, and we're hoping to make sure that we're being more inclusive of our Francophone colleagues while we're able to be. I'm seeing some, oh yeah, there's a six, Robin, that's too bad. Peter, lovely to see a happy little smiley cat face. Morgan, love it, bringing the energy as always. Thanks, everyone. We are going to move to the next slide, but we can always come back to this if we need to reassess what level of cat we're feeling today. We are just wanted to take a moment to step back. Some of you, many of you that I see, we've known, over the years, and we've seen you before on calls, but just taking a quick moment, this is our team. Wanted to give you a quick idea of what it is that different colleagues are kind of focused on in case you were wondering, hey, I was thinking, maybe this would be a good idea in terms of, something we should do on a GFAN call or something we should do as a research brief or, something, a relationship that GFAN should build, et cetera, et cetera. We wanted to give you just a quick overview in terms of, what our respective roles are and, sort of what we do. I'm not going to go into depth on this because I do think many of you know who we are and will reach out to whomever you need to figure things out. But it's just a reminder, as one of the things that I will cover that we're working on this year is a new strategy for GFAN, as our current strategy expires this year. And it's either the best thing ever that we have the opportunity to take a moment and sit back and think about, how to make sure that GFAN is, fit for purpose going into 2030, or it's the craziest thing ever to be adding that this year to the replenishment. But if the Global Fund can do it, I think we can do it. Um, so this has been, this picture just kind of shows, what we think of as partners in GFAN and where you all sit, and who we try to work with to do the work that we do. But hopefully, you know where to find all of us. In terms of our emails, it's always our first name at globalfundadvocatesnetwork.org. So don't ever hesitate to reach out and let us know if you have a question or if you have an idea for something that you'd like to see us doing with you in the network. If we could go to the next slide. So just to say that this year, I feel like every replenishment year at some point we say the same thing where we have to do everything we did last time, plus more. So there are other ways that we have to think about engaging, and there are other ways that we need to, improve in terms of how we communicate and collaborate. But to a large extent, looking forward, a lot of this should feel a little bit familiar in terms of, our regular calls like this one, engaging on social media platforms, bringing advocates together at in-person events and opportunities that will continue to be, our main focus, our bread and butter. As a network. We will continue to build off of the report that we launched last July, how to close a funding gap. So you're going to see a lot over the next few weeks ahead of the anticipated release of the investment case and preparatory meeting for the replenishment, around sort of some of those messages and the reasons why we felt it was important to situate this replenishment year as the choices that we're going to make, the choices that donors are going to make, and the choices that we can make as a global community on the three diseases. For us, we do have our Francophone colleagues, and having increased resources to be able to focus and support our Francophone colleagues this year is really exciting for us. And you'll hopefully see and hear more about that over the year. But also in a first for us as GFAN Global, in partnership with GFAN Africa and ITBC MENA, we're hosting an donor-facing advocacy meeting in Morocco early next month, to focus on some MENA region work this year as well. It's not it's not going to come up with like the solution that I think some of us who've been around for a few replenishments have hoped for in the region, but hopefully it's starting to build relationships with advocates and starting to look for opportunities for advocacy in that region, which at least for us has typically been a little bit difficult to figure out how we could engage and how the global, GFAN community could engage. We're also fortunate we have increased resources for replenishment communications this year, so hopefully you're going to be seeing some new tools from us. Most of these will support will leverage some of the Perception Hub data, that data that the Gates Foundation released, and you can find it all online. But some of that data that sort of shows not necessarily a different way than we've been communicating before about why the replenishment is so important, why the Global Fund is so important, but able to focus a little bit more on providing more communications tools to all of you, but also in our campaigning. And as I said before, we are working this year to develop our new strategy. So there will be opportunities for all of you as members to engage in that. There will be, sort of a general membership survey, and some of you will be reaching out to be able to have more in-depth conversations or perhaps participate in different ways in us figuring out that new strategy. And we'll of course work with our international steering committee. If you don't know, they're all listed on our website, and they're a great group of your colleagues here from the network who help us and provide advice and guidance on a strategic level for us at the GFAN Secretariat. Conte only gave me 5 minutes for all of this, so I'm probably over time already, but we will go to the next slide and just really quickly say, obviously it's replenishment year. Obviously, we have these sort of key things that happen sort of, in that triangle weird thing. If you didn't notice, my special skill at GFAN is really text heavy PowerPoint slides. So I was trying to do something that had an image. You're welcome. Starting off the new year strong. But just to say again, that investment case is going to be released soon. You will start to see some of the similar tools and the kinds of things we've done before, but you will also hopefully see and have, sort of a different feel in terms of how we are able to communicate in the longer term around what the investment case, provides. And no, we have no clue what's in the investment case beyond many of the conversations we've sat with various of you on it. And no, we don't have any more information about the preparatory meeting other than that it is strongly expected in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And hopefully we will hear more about that. And when we know what that meeting looks like, it has looked different over the years. In long time ago, for those of us who've been around a very long time, it looked like a board meeting. There wasn't much beyond that. But in recent years, it has been a much more dynamic and interesting space for advocacy and conversation. So we'll see what exactly is finalized and where the opportunities are, and we'll work with our regional partners around making sure that we're all collectively ready globally to sort of launch our advocacy once that investment case, or relaunch it once that investment case is out. So that's my overview, and my apology to the translators, as always, for speaking quickly. Oh, and Priyanka is noting in the chat that we have just this week started a Blue Sky account and put in whatever that is. I don't know if it's a tag or a name, but you can find us there if you're on Blue Sky. I have it on my list to actually go on to Blue Sky tomorrow to see what it's all about myself. But so, through these calls and through our listserv and, on our social media and website, we will continue to keep you up to date on what we're doing and the ways that we're trying to support you and do the advocacy that, I guess we all have to do ahead of the replenishment. So that's my spiel for today, to just give you a quick sort of overview. I am going to assume that there aren't any significant questions that need discussion on this, but I would welcome any comments or clarifications that colleagues might appreciate in the chat and or in sort of the discussion moments as we go forward. But I did just want to hand it back to Conte so we can get to that a more substantive issue for our call today around debt to health. So Conte, I'm going to pass it over to you. But again, please use the chat if there are questions or clarifications that I can answer. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget, we're coming back to the cats before we're finished. Thanks, Conte.
Thanks, Katie. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So, sorry, I'm terribly dehydrated. So we wanted to talk about debt to health today. It's a slightly technical topic, and the reason why we wanted to bring it up was that, as you might know, it's a replenishment year. And as you might also know, things are not going well. We don't have any inside information. It's just we know that, half the world is on fire and everyone is cutting budgets everywhere. So we're concerned. And some of the reactions that we've heard from these concerns are that there's hope in new ways of financing. Innovative financing is the term that the Global Fund likes to use. And one of these tools is debt to health, and debt to health in particular has been talked about quite a bit. And so we wanted to give everyone a chance to better understand what is that tool exactly, what it can do, and what perhaps it can't do, or the reasons why we should be enthusiastic about it, but realistic about what can be achieved. And so if you really remember, before we get into the depth, if you want to remember one thing from this presentation and the following one from Claudio, is that our sense is that debt to health is a really useful tool, but it's mostly a tool for top-ups, and top-ups are great, but they will not substitute to pledges in particular from major donors. So why are we talking about specifically debt to health among the different types of innovative financing in 2025? So there is a lot of countries have taken on a lot of debt, especially developing countries. It was true before COVID, where we saw a lot of countries with elevated debt levels. But during COVID, people and countries took on a lot more debt. There's been multiple calls from the UN, from the IMF, from the World Bank, from a number of political leaders for solutions and for ways to alleviate the debt burden, because the debt repayments, debt servicing, how you call it, is competing with core government budget. In over 50 countries, the debt servicing is the largest item of government budgets. And they spend more on servicing the debt than they spend on health or education. That's over 50 countries. So that we have reached levels of unsustainable levels of debts, and so people are talking a lot about how to address that. In that context, debt swaps, including debt to health, can appear as a solution or as a attractive tool. So what is debt to health and what are debt swaps? The basic idea is that a lender, whether it's a country, whether it's a private entity, cancels some debt. So, for example, let's take the example of Germany and Indonesia. We recently had a deal. Germany accepted to cancel 75 million that it had lended to Indonesia. And in exchange, Indonesia accepted to invest 75 million into health programs, and specifically in that case, into a global fund. So the idea is that you kind of kill two birds with one stone. So you're canceling some amount of debt. To be clear, the amounts that we're talking about are like not enough to offer significant debt relief, but it's, you're chipping away at some debt. And at the same time, so you're giving breathing room, and you're investing into core programs, social spending. Specifically, so you have a lot of these debt swaps. They started in the 1980s. It's not a very new idea. But specifically, debt to health is a tool used by the Global Fund, where the Global Fund works as an intermediary. So the lender cancels some amount of debt, and the borrower, so the country that borrowed that money, gives an equivalent or slightly lower, depending on the deals, amount to the Global Fund to invest in that country. So for example, in the example of Germany, Indonesia gave 75 million to the Global Fund. These 75 million were cancelled from the debt it owed to Germany. The role of a global fund in those deals is to help with trust, because the lenders don't want to cancel debt and then not know what is happening to the money that they cancel, at least as part of these swaps. The whole idea is that they have control over where the money is invested, and they want to see it invested in specific ways. In those debt to health deals, the Global Fund works as an intermediary. They receive the funds, they manage them, and they guarantee impact. So the first debt to health deals were in 2007 in Indonesia and Pakistan, and I'll go to my next slide. And there's been in total 14 of those. And in total, there's 330 million that have been invested in the Global Fund via debt to health, and about 500 million cancelled in debt across those deals. So typically more debt is being cancelled than money is being invested in the Global Fund as part of the way these deals are structured. Only 3 lenders have participated in those deals: Germany, Spain, and Australia. And even though the Global Fund has been exploring other arrangements, all debt to health for now is only available for sovereign bilateral debt. Meaning that it's one country that has lent to another country, and that's the type of debt that can be cancelled. That's not the only type of debt out there, and it's in fact a smaller portion of the overall debt that countries take on. But we might explore that later. So debt to health, there's a lot of upside. It's a bit of a two-in-one solution for debt and health investment. Again, when we talk about, it's important here to remember scale. It's not the same as large debt restructuring, but it is a way to chip away at debt and to give breathing room to countries to invest into essential services. From an advocacy perspective, and that's perhaps more relevant to us on the call today, it opens new budget lines, because typically it's Ministry of Finances that manage that questions of debt, not coordination or development ministries. And so whereas ODA is being cut in a number of major countries, or at least scrutinized, it gives you access to different ways to get the money that you need. So that's one of the interesting promises of debt to health, is that it gives you access to new actors that might not have the same constraint within a given government as our usual counterparts. But, and I've said that a few times, I'm repeating it, so far it's still quite small scale, and it's only a handful of donors that have expressed interest. So debt to health really so far has remained a top-up tool. 300 million is like not a lot compared to the 62 billion that the Global Fund has invested over the past 20 years. So it's still a very small portion of the overall resource that has been available. And only Germany, Spain, and Australia so far have engaged into deals. That doesn't mean that more countries couldn't join their rank, but it's just not happened so far. Another element to be aware of is that these are technical deals, and they present a number of challenges for advocates and for governments. What do we mean by that, and sort of how to address some of these challenges? So how, as an advocate, how should we think about debt to health? So the first thing is that they're complicated because it connects to the world of finance. What that means is that some countries might not be interested in taking up a debt to health deal because they don't want to be perceived as being in distress and needing to cancel debt, because that can be very bad if they borrow on private markets. You have an intermediary that's involved. So it's the Global Fund in debt to health deals, but how the money is invested exactly, what share of the debt that is being cancelled actually goes to the Global Fund. There's a lot of parameters. It's not the same as just saying France should give 1.5 billion to the Global Fund. There's a lot more elements to take into account, and it's important to be precise when discussing these issues, because the people who you will be talking to, and that's the third point here, meet new actors, are likely to be in the Ministry of Finance, and they will, they will have an expectation of a certain level of technical understanding from on the side of the advocates. It's also a fight on two fronts, because there's not a very high awareness of these systems, and so you need to convince donor countries to cancel some debt, but you also need to just let them know that it's a possibility. And similarly, in countries that would receive, that would be on the receiving end of those debt to health deals, they need to know to ask for it. So it adds a layer of challenge. You need to have two countries involved. That means advocacy in two countries, two governments, so a lot of coordination for advocates across North and South. And that comes back to that technicality element. You need to set clear targets for the lender and for the borrowers. Who are they? How much are we talking about? What are the exact modalities of the deal, and what priorities should the money be invested in? So that's how you can prepare, that's how you can work on it. But if you want to take one lesson from it, is don't think it will solve the F replenishment. It could come as a nice top-up, could compensate some potential gap in specific countries, but it's not a solution for the F replenishment. And if we see large cuts from large donors, that won't make up the difference. That's the end of my presentation. I'm sorry to finish on a little bit of a bummer. And I give it back to Katie to pass on to Claudio. And I'll stop sharing so that Claudio can share his presentation.
Thank you. I missed somehow in our run of show that I was going to intervene here, but again, colleagues, as we go through these conversations, please don't hesitate to use the chat for any questions or clarifications that we can either try and answer now or, sort of get to when we get to discussions. But we have Claudio Fernandez from Gestos, who we had reached out to, for many different reasons, but because we know this is an area that he's been working in, but also because this was a focus for Brazil as a general thing through the G20 last year. And I think we've heard from Claudio on G20 work in the past. And so just wanting to introduce him really quickly. And again, it's very early. It's 5 a.m. somewhere in the world for him. So we thank him for joining us. Hopefully you're able to get your presentation up. And Claudio, I'll just pass it over to you. We're going to spend, we have about 10 to 15 minutes for you to share your knowledge and share your presentation. And then we will hear from our colleague Daniel Magwari in Indonesia about their experience with a very Global Fund specific debt to health sort of deals. And then we will open up for questions and discussions after Claudio, before Daniel, and then again at the end. So Claudio, over to you. Peter, I'm sorry, I'm just seeing one hand raised. Peter, if you could put it into the chat, or if it is really critical to jump in right now, please go ahead and unmute, but otherwise use the chat. Thank you. Okay, I see his hand has gone down. So Claudio, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Kit. This sound is good. And excellent. Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Quentin. And thank you, GFAN, for the invitation to discuss a little bit about debt to health and the perspectives that we as civil society and GFAN can utilize that as, I hope you can see the presentation. Yes, let me just play. Most likely what happens in Zoom is that I'm not going to be able to see any of you or anything like that. So once I start playing the presentation, okay. So debt to health swaps, an innovative financing mechanism that came about in 2015, particularly being rescuing the idea from the 1980s as a way to free up resources for specific sustainable development investments. There is a consensus in right now, in 2025, the beginning of 2025, but actually in 2024, there is a consensus that sustainable development needs sustainable financing. And as you all are used to doing the advocacy for replenishment of the Global Fund, replenishing funds is always a battle. So should be a way that financing and that replenishment of the funds could be automatic. But debt to health swaps can help on that, because another consensus that is coming out from 2024 in several spaces is that even though there is a lack of resources for sustainable financing and sustainable development, particularly health, nature, and the environment, there is a lot of resources that have been tied up in excruciating contracts, because that's essentially what finance is. So let's go to the basic. Finance is, pardon me, finance is a contract based on faith, on trust, right? Actually, it was before the creation of coinage, finance existed already, and it existed through the process of faith and trust on the other, that that person or that institution or that group would repay back. So that's like already looking at the future. And countries getting debt. Why do countries getting debt? Because there's not enough finance, in their case, coming from tax revenues to be able to invest in the country infrastructure and everything that is needed for the country to develop. But that's not the end of the story, because what happens sometimes, and actually many times, and some may say most of the time, is that there's a cycle of low or no return on public finance to government inadequacy. What does that mean? It means, among other things, corruption, but mismanagement of resources. And that actually is very well explored by institutional economics that comes out of 2024 as a recipient of the Nobel Prize on Economics, that exactly shows how history and how institutions, well catered and well-governed institutions, are extremely important for development and for investing in social and other infrastructures. And that creates, unfortunately, in developing countries, but not only in developing countries, also nowadays more and more in developed countries as well, a persistence of poverty and the expansion of inequality. And that has to do with political economy and many other things. But debt also has increased quite a lot in the past 16 to 20 years because of recurrent natural disasters, particularly in small island development states and some African countries like Mozambique. And besides that, these countries are battling other issues, trying to get into the process of development. So what are financial swaps? Financial swaps are actually something that is being practiced. It is practiced in the financial markets for the longest time. It's a kind of derivative. So for instance, if you hold a specific debt, if you're a company and you have a specific debt, you can actually manage your debt by exchanging that debt through a swap. And that swap is going to bring you a lower or a fixed rate type of interest rate. For instance, a swap can be so you can all understand, like a mortgage, okay? Somebody has a mortgage and you can refinance because you want to improve your home by having a mortgage. And that refinancing is going to give you a longer time frame, and it's going to give you a better conditions for paying back your debt. Why is that important for the creditors? It is important because the debtors cannot default. That's much a worse situation for the creditors. The creditors, as the process of finance works, they want the debtors to stay alive, to stay paying the service of the debt. So the debtors has, in a sense, an advantage point, or let's put it like a comparative advantage, let's put it this way, towards the creditors that they can use to persuade the creditors to negotiate those swaps. Because, of course, it's much better than defaulting on the debt, and then the creditors is not going to get anything out of it. But here's the situation. Debt, in particularly sovereign debt, countries' debts nowadays, is not only one country owing or getting a loan from a specific institution of another country, or a specific institution like the World Bank, or a multilateral development bank, or or the Bundesbank, for instance, in Germany. Actually, debt nowadays is being divided by populations, people, investors, institutional investors, pension funds own debt of specific countries sometimes, not the low-income countries and least developed countries because they have high-risk type of debt, but the distribution of debt through bonds and through special purpose vehicles, for instance, that are derivatives, creates a situation where debt is being spread out, okay? Because of that, then we need financial engineering. And as a matter of fact, the Global Fund, it was one of the pioneers to bring the whole idea of debt to development back in 2007, as Quentin and Kit already talked a little bit about it. And it started with Indonesia, the Indonesian case. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. But that starts spreading, and debt to nature became a very interesting instrument for trying and financing some of the 2030 agenda, the climate agenda, and particularly financing for development as a whole, as an innovative mechanism, because as we can understand about finance, is that it's a performative, it's a contract. So it is in the books, in a sense, which means someone owes somebody else, a certain amount. But that amount can be converted, can be transformed into liquidity. And liquidity is real resource. So that's the situation here in the finance that we are facing, particularly in this moment where there's about 51 to 66 countries in that distress. So, the situation of debt has increased so much that the idea of what's called now, what's being called retro bonds exactly that, is exchanging your debt for another type of debt, another type of contract, and that contract now would have a commitment of that part of that investment. And that's exactly where it comes: debt to health, debt to nature, debt to conservancy overall. And that has been now worked out as far as financial engineering, particularly by the Bank of International Settlements, has a great paper on a type of special purpose vehicle that the countries can utilize to transform their debt into freed resources, or pretty much like opening space, fiscal space for those countries to invest in their specific infrastructure, health, and nature overall. So how can we implement that? So first, we need to choose the health project to implement, or the country is going to choose that through a consultation on Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, and everything. And the creditors will analyze the debt to health proposal, see how committed the country is. Because here's one thing about finance: it's all about, as I said in the beginning, trust. So we do need a lot of trust between the parties that are negotiating. Then we get into planning. So the debtor define the amount of resources and package the pitch. As you're going to see, and I'm going to flip because the time is not going to be our friend to go too much in details. The creditors meet with the debtor for agreement on vehicles and intermediation. That means real meetings between ministers of finance and the other countries and the other institutions or the other countries' authorities. and then to start implementing, per se. The debtor country and creditors then has to get a intermediation. And that intermediation, that's where the Global Fund, for instance, came in, as a financial intermediation between the two parties, the debtor and the creditor. So we define the transaction size, how much is going to be, the conversion rate, how much of that debt of high yield interest rate is going to convert to a new type of debt. Because here's one thing that we have to think about is the fact that in the modern sovereign debt architecture of the international financial architecture, based on bonds, based on contracts, on a myriad of types of contracts, is that we have responsibilities and institutions to intermediate those contracts, the legal aspect. Pardon me. That's what Quentin talked about, the difficulty, and that's one of the major drawbacks of those type of swaps, is the fact that there is a lot of service. So, for instance, legal framework for the special purpose vehicles like credit default swaps, or standards and guidelines, like the country's contract that is going to be renegotiated with the new issuing of new bonds. So from the creditor perspective, they're going to write off the loss. But at the same time, pardon again, I'm coming out of a cold. Part of that is not really a loss, complete loss, because in the case of debt to health, it's a way out of investing back into the country. So it's part of ODA. It's a complement to ODA, Official Development Assistance, by the countries that have already performed it. Pardon again. For the debtor country, it's a question of earmarking those resources, because those resources are not going to be back into the treasury and the country can do anything. It's going to be for a specific investment. And the health financing agency mobilized more resources by using freed capital to leverage new financing. That's exactly what happened with the Global Fund once they got some resources coming from a debt to health contract. Okay. Very important part here, which is the evaluating aspect of it. And Kit, you can give me the 2 minutes or 3 minutes heads up once I start. The evaluating is what creates more trust, okay, between the creditor and the debtor. So for every one of these contracts, the better you get those key performance indicators, the better for the creditors, because they know that the debtor countries are being responsible. And that's one of the very aspects of debt to health and debt to nature contracts, is that the creditors and the debtors need to really be on the same page of trust. And the more you develop that with key performance indicator, the more the contracts can be performed, and you can actually increase those. So what is happening overall is that based on the paper that came out from the Bank of International Settlements and the IMF provision of crisis, of debt liquidity crisis, the G20 in Brazil put out a specific paper called the G20 Presidency Note on Debt to Development as a tool to be more worked on in the future. So now passing on to South Africa, that's something that is going to be worked more. And that goes on the same situation that I specified before. So you identify what is the project, you convert the notes, you build the confidence among the investor, you coordinate, you establish, and you evaluate. Always evaluation is quite important. What are the challenges? It's intricate and expensive operation to create those special purpose vehicles, in a sense of, that type of credit default swaps and other type of papers. But that can be created. It's not rocket science. And that part of financial engineering, as I said in the beginning, already exists. The other challenge is the fact that the negotiation period is quite long, between 2 to 4 years in all of the contracts and debt to health swaps made until now. So that's not an immediate type of replenishment. But if the financial engineering gets more perfected with the push that is being now given by the G20 and also by the Financing for Development Conference, that can be sped up. So that's an opportunity as well. Another challenge is the earmarking of the debt to health. Usually there is this ideology among tax experts and ministers of finance that when you earmark certain resources of public finance, you kind of put a straitjacket on the government. Advocates have a different idea on that. Sometimes those things are necessary because some of the very important areas are not being financed enough because they're not being considered priority by a specific government. So sometimes it's good to have earmarked resources for some complex and some sectors and some type of infrastructure that some governments do not want to do. Like, for instance, HIV and AIDS was a case in point for the longest time. Many countries did not want to invest in that. There was a lot of bias. So if you did not earmark those resources, which in the case of Brazil, for instance, there is earmarked resources for municipal investment on HIV and AIDS programs. If there was no earmarking, a lot of mayors could just say, oh, no, I'm not going to invest in that. I'm going to use the money for something else. Anyway, another challenge, transparency and trust, as I said many times, a limit set of creditors. That's another problem of creditors that are willing so far to do the debt to health. And it's not a debt solution, but a fiscal relief. So civil society, for instance, criticized, and I'm going to go finish with that, because it's not a debt solution. That's true, it's not a debt solution, but it frees up resources and much needed resources in many cases. For a specific country to get a few $1 million for buying nets to fight malaria is extremely important, even though it's not going to fix the debt problem of that country. So anyway, the opportunities is setting the new standards for this new financial engineering, which is already happening with the state contingent debt instruments that has been created exactly to this type of debt to development swap. Okay, so this is something that is already getting into the process of becoming normal. Not yet in a large way, but the Argentinian and the Greek negotiations was very much based on swaps that were pegged onto GDP. And that's quite an interesting aspect because you can peg a specific swap to a specific performance indicator. And the state contingent debt instrument is something that the advocacy network definitely needs to get more acquainted with. That also comes in the process of financial architecture reform. Everybody's asking for that. The Secretary General of the United Nations, the Financing for Development Conference, the World Bank, the IMF, everybody's asking for financial architecture reform, even though that's always stops pretty much on the veto power of the US at the IMF and the governors and the boards of the World Bank and the IMF. That creates a lot of issues on not pushing forward the financial architecture reform.
So Claudio,
Another opportunity to establish the legal framework where it's applicable, and I should finish, right? And the finance the needed sector for development. And also, here's a great opportunity, the fact of fiscal discipline. Here, I'm just going to flip through the Addis Ababa Action Agenda calls the Global Fund and calls for the importance of the Global Fund as a way of financing health. Called already for debt to health and debt to nature swaps. So that's already from 2015, and that's evolving. The elements paper for the 4th Conference on Financing for Development that is going to happen in June, July 2025 already calls debt swaps as a way for maximize, meaning expanding debt swaps. And that's exactly what I was talking about, more debt swaps, which is creating that into the engineering, into the architecture, not something as an exception, but something that can already be part of the whole process. Here's the result of the Summit of the Future as well, Pact for the Future. So a big push for debt swaps for climate or nature. Multilateral development banks also needs to be part of the debt swaps, and that's the Bridgetown Initiative. Bridgetown Initiative from Barbados, the small island development states facing a lot of problems with disasters. And here are some successful debt to health initiatives. What I would like to call attention is, as I say here, for instance, Indonesia, 35 million to strengthen, plus 35 million went to the Global Fund, 70 million was canceled of debt, but the total debt at that time was 62 billion. Now, here's a crisis. In those years, from 2007 and to 2020, 13 years, there was almost 300% increase on sovereign debt of Indonesia. How do you resolve that? That's a separate situation. Here are the other successful debt to health initiatives. But if you can look at it, the current debt to nature, the largest swap done so far was with Ecuador in 2023, 1.1 billion in total savings of debt, but that's only 1.3% of the total debt of Ecuador. And that creates exactly what the CSO mechanism says. It's a false solution narrative because it's not going to solve the debt problem. But at the same time, there's an aspect which is give more push to the reform of financial architecture, bring more financial literacy to the advocates as well, because they need to get more engaged into the details of that, bring more fiscal responsibilities to the governments, particularly the debtors, because sometimes what happens is that governments get their debt forgiven, but then they get into debt again because of the whole beginning that I talked about, the institutional economics and the lack of governance in those countries. And I'm sorry that I stepped over, but it's quite a complex issue. And thank you very much. Here's my email if you want to get more engaged into a situation where we can discuss more specifics.
Thank you, Claudio. I think, already comment about how useful it is to have this in the chat. And it is helpful to hear from a colleague who's been engaged in this and to understand the framing coming out of Brazil's presidency of the G20 and where some of this is going and perspectives on where it needs to go. I have to say I'm still struggling with the Ecuador debt to nature swap and the amounts and how little of total debt that actually is. That is quite something. I hope that you don't mind sharing those slides with us so we can post it on our website with the recording from this call. So I hope you don't mind sharing that with Conte and I after the call. Just opening it up for any questions or comments. There's a very specific one from Mark about the Ecuador one about who the creditor is. I thought I saw a development bank, but perhaps it was a development bank. Okay. Just opening it up to other colleagues to see if there are any questions. And I would remind colleagues, because it's our first call of the year and because we're talking about something quite technical, there are actually no stupid questions here. We're colleagues, we're trying to learn together. So no matter what your question is, please don't hesitate to raise it with us. But also respecting that for many, it's early in their day or late in their day, and it might take a little bit more time to absorb the information. Robin, please go ahead. And then we'll go to Daniel. And Daniel, maybe we can have you just also share your perspective and then, once again, open it up for questions. But Robin, I'll go to you first.
Thanks so much, Katie. And thanks so much, Claudio. This has been really incredibly interesting and helpful. I may have missed it, but I'm curious to what extent is debt for health being discussed or introduced into the big multilateral development banks and regional development banks within the IMF. So the big lenders that in the World Bank that really kind of dominate above global health institutions such as the Global Fund. Thanks.
Claudio, did you want to address that? Just noting there's a bit of a chat around that Ecuador one and who was involved and the novelty of having perhaps a private sector, some private debt mixed in with some development bank debt, maybe something else. So Claudio, over to you to respond to Robin's question and maybe add more to that context. And then I see Colin's hand raised and we'll come back for more questions.
Thank you, Kit, and thanks for the question. Yes, that was a novel way, so it's not directly two governments negotiating, but there was a third and fourth party negotiating, the Inter-American Development Bank. So that was a regional development bank. That was the financial intermediation, did the financial intermediation. Because some of the debt, as I said at the beginning, they are bond issues. So they had to be repurposed and they have to be reissued. And then in this case, it was the U.S. Development Finance Corporation that reissued what they're called the retro bonds. So that's the financial engineering that gets tricky because of the legality of it. In some countries, you actually have to create a new law to permit that, some of the developing countries, to be able to perform those debt swaps. As far as the big lenders, the question for the big lenders, Yes, it would be a question of convincing the board of governors and directors of those, particularly the IMF and the World Bank and the other multilateral banks, to forgive some of those debts to those countries. But here's a caveat. Every time that a country gets into a debt swap, there is an effect on the credit rating of the country. And that also needs to be negotiated with the credit rating agencies on how to interpret debt swaps for development. And that's a part of the advocacy that needs to be done, particularly this year in 2025. And it's one of the topics that is being discussed at the Financing for Development Preparation Committee. And the next meeting is in February, between 10 and 14th of February. So that's one of the talks there.
Thanks. That's very helpful. I think it's a helpful point around the credit agencies, and just how complex these can get, especially when they're bigger scale ones like that Ecuador one and some of the other ones that may need to come. Colin, go ahead.
Well, and I think Daniel actually was in front of me. Daniel, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Daniel. Hello, it's very late for you. Hello, my friend.
Yeah,
Happy New Year.
no, yes, it's okay. No, thank you so much. Good night or good morning or whatever it is, friends. Yeah, happy to share the sharing the experience of Indonesia. First of all, I would like to start to say that looking at the potentially challenging for the egg replenishment, I have been raising about the debt to health as one of not new, the other approach to fill the what we expect to the pledge, so debt to health can be one of opportunity. Looking at Indonesia, the first experience we like in the discussion on 2007 we got from Germany 35 of the debt swap amount 70 million. Then also continue with another one Germany 56 of 56 at 2021, and then this year 75 million European with the 75 euro that's we got for Indonesia. Then another one from Australia also at 2010 for 35 million of 71 million. What I understand I remember in the beginning approach it start from Germany, then Australia, and then Spain also did for some countries like Egypt, Cameroon, Ethiopia, El Salvador, Jordan, who else? Sri Lanka, Pakistan with Germany, and I believe other thing. And I heard that Mongolia just finished with the agreement with the Germany also. So looking at this, what I understand, I engage a lot because I was in CCM, because it's always involved CCM in the process, not in the beginning level. But in the beginning level, usually what I understand is mediated or facilitated by Global Fund. So Global Fund approach the creditor, the G20 country, and also approach the debitor, then facilitated by Global Fund. When there are agreement, communication will continue. Of course, it will start by Foreign Ministry, also Health Ministry, I mean, and then the Finance Ministry also. Then when there are agreement, always facilitated in the beginning by the Global Fund. So the room for community to do advocacy, I think is not in that level. When there are some agreement, then go to the CCM, then CCM will give the recommendation. The funding will go with which disease. It can be AIDS, TB, or malaria. But some of the creditor will decide by their own, like Germany in the first time, they prefer the money will go for HIV. Like Australia, the money go to TB. But like the grant signing last month with Germany for 75 million euro, that it's proposed by Indonesia, 53% go to malaria, another percentage go to TB, and another percentage go to RSSH. Starting this year, actually 2025, 5 until 2027, to fill the gap from the FAR. So it proposed by the CCM, looking at the part what is not fulfilled by the Global Fund, and then that CCM proposed to the Global Fund. So the mechanism, what I understand, always through the CCM mechanism, and the advocacy, it's always starting mediating or facilitating by Global Fund to the debitor and creditor. So the room for the civil society in the country level, what I'm thinking, it should be when it's go to the CCM, so that's a community should make sure the money is not managed by government only. The community PR also will manage the fund, or the program is not only managed for government for their own side in the clinical part, but also the prevention and other community programs. That's what I understand. What we can do in the global, that it should be discussed with what I'm thinking. I know Claudia Pauline is here. So the Global Fund, they have a unit, they have a people who lobbying the country, are doing advocacy to the creditor in the G20. And I know it's limited creditor who's willing to agree with this approach. Only Germany, Australia, and Spain for time being, what I understand. But this is the way for us, a new approach, how we can do advocacy with a global fund to do advocacy to the G20 country like France, like US, like Netherlands and other countries to support this approach. That's what I can share. If I have any question or clarification, then I go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate that. There's lots of information on online. Colin, I'm gonna actually have to close the call. So if you do still have something you'd like to comment on, please place it in the chat or reach out. We will be sharing the presentations from today. We have a brief that Conte has been working on. We did reach out to our colleagues at the Global Fund, but a little bit belated in this new year, and our colleagues there who would be able to speak to this a bit more authoritatively were not available at the time for this call today, but are very interested in continuing to engage. So I think we just wanted to start off with this year, because while it's not sort of the answer to the many different challenges that we face this year, there are important moments in the broader, debt swap conversation this year that we hope to engage in, and believe it will likely be important for us as advocates to engage in, and we'll rely on colleagues like Claudio and others who are, sort of leading the way in those processes and in those conversations to bring action and advocacy ideas back to us.
Sorry,
Also,
Katie.
yes,
May I add another second?
sorry.
Yeah, may I add a few information?
We're just we have to wrap up the call, Daniel, because we're almost at the hour. I'm very sorry, but if there is other,
It's okay.
yeah, I'm sorry, and you've joined us so late. But again, we can share over the listserv, and I think this is a topic that we probably need to come back to in the next few months, and hopefully we'll come back to. I think it was Peter, or somebody else had a very specific question in the chat around how physically money moves around in these situations, and we can get better answers to those so that there's clarity for you as advocates in those conversations in terms of the very specific debt to health tool of the Global Fund, which is its own very specific process. And what Claudio's talked about is broader debt swaps and how some of those are work as well, and sort of what they involve. But there is a very specific tool in the Global Fund, and both Conte and Amina, I think, posted some links to that sort of formal kind of, what is that specific tool. So thank you all for joining us today on our first call of the year. Again, we'll share this recording and the resources from the call, as well as links to sort of information that's been shared. We'll be coming back to this, but also we're starting our regular program, I don't know, our regular set of calls every 2 weeks. So we'll be sending out information about the next one, which I think which would be 2 weeks from today, which I don't even know what the date is, but I think it's something like the 28th or 29th. of January. So thank you all. It's lovely to see some of your faces. I hope you take care of yourselves and your inner cats, whatever number you were, and just looking forward to continuing to work with you this year. And thank you especially to Claudio and Daniel for sharing their specific expertise and experience. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of your days.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Quentin.
Thank you, Claudio.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.